Hello and welcome to my round 5 match for the Highlander League. I'm playing TR45, Mono Blue Artifact Ramp, playing against Jund Midrange. Uh, my opponent's on the play. This hand here is a pretty obvious mulligan, doesn't really do much of anything. Didn't have colours to cast the threat that I had. Here again, we have a mulligan. I've got one land and that's not casting anything. My opponent's mulligan to 6 and they're keeping on 6, but yeah, looking at this, the hand doesn't really do anything. Let's throw that one back. So this hand here, it's got a lot of mana, but the only actual sort of threat doesn't do anything, but we're down to 5, so we'll keep this one. So I'll put back Transmute Artifact, just because that's not castable with the hand as it stands. And probably here it's sort of a choice of what we put back for the next one. I ended up going with the Candelabra. It doesn't really generate, you know, significantly more mana than what I've got otherwise, and I've got heaps of mana as it stands. So now it's basically hope we draw something. Um, but there's plenty of threats, so we'll see what we get. And immediately get paid off with drawing a Mystic Forge, so that's fantastic. So here it's just playing out the Mystic Forge, hope there's something good on top of the deck, and go from there. So Mystic Forge is pretty good on a mulligan, draw some cards. So here we see Walking Ballista on top of the deck. So now I'm basically just trying to work out where the casting manifold key gets me up to being able to cast Ballista for 2. And using it to untap the mana vault does mean that I can get 4 mana and cast a Ballista for 2. So we'll just play everything out. My opponent doesn't really have any good main deck ways of destroying my artifact outside of, abrupt decay and things like that. They don't have any sort of like great artifact hoses, so I'm not too worried about losing things here. So I see an Academy Ruins on top, so the one thing I can think about here is whether I use the Mystic Forge to exile the Academy Ruins. So I sort of want to keep it, because even though I don't have access to blue mana at the moment, once I get blue mana, being able to recur Walking Ballista is quite powerful against mid-range sort of decks. Especially because I've got a lot of mana sitting around at the moment. If I can get into a position where I can just sort of cast Ballista for X's 3 or 4 every turn, that's a pretty good way of just sort of grinding it out against a mid-range deck. It's also another land that isn't going to die like the City of Traders. So again, I sort of want to keep that just in case my opponent does manage to blow up some of my artifacts. It's just a way of making sure that I'll be able to continue to build up my mana, and even if I do get, the manifold key or the crypt blown up, it means that I'll still have some mana that's going to stick around. So at the moment I'm not too concerned about my position. I can use the mana crypt and manifold key to untap mana vault, and that gets me to 4 mana and means that I can be pumping the ballista each turn, which is a reasonable threat there. And here the mana crypt gets abrupt decayed, so thankfully they can't hit the Mystic Forge, which would be a real big issue. And at this stage I definitely want to keep the Academy Ruins, because that's a land that will stick around, and it means that I can untap my mana vault with using the manifold key. Because Mishra's Workshop, whilst it might be a very good land, can't use it for your activated abilities, which means that it can be pretty awkward in this kind of spot. So here, just cast the Basalt Monolith off the top. This is pretty good because it just turns my Workshop mana into regular mana in case there's a Planeswalker on top. And now we've got Inventor's Fair. So what I can do here is I could end up with the Basalt Monolith and the Mana Vault tapped to pump the Ballista. But seeing as how I've got Inventor's Fair on top, I think I'm far better off playing the Academy Ruins. And then I can use that to untap Mana Vault at the end of turn, and then next turn play Inventor's Fair, and then I should have heaps of mana to be able to use the Inventor's Sphere and hopefully be able to cast whatever it is that I get with the Inventor's Sphere. So now I'm basically just hoping that my opponent doesn't play anything that is going to be too super powerful against me. And main deck, I don't think they've got anything that I am super concerned about here. They've definitely got some planeswalkers and things, but they don't have any way of shutting off my artifacts main deck. And here they're casting Liliana the Last Hope, which really isn't something that I'm terribly concerned about. That's definitely not winning the game in the next turn or two. And honestly, the Walking Ballista isn't really how I'm planning to win the game at this point. I'm definitely planning on getting something busted with the Inventor's Sphere and going from there. So there's nothing on top of my library with the Mystic Forge. So now it's just a matter of what can I get with the Inventor's Sphere. So at the moment I'm just trying to add up the mana. So I need 4 mana to tutor with the Inventor's Sphere. And then after that I'm left with basically the Mishra's Workshop and the Basalt Monolith untapped. Untapping the Basalt Monolith with the Manifold Key and tapping it again means that I've got 8 mana after using the Inventor's Sphere, which means that I can fetch and play a Sundering Titan here, which, considering that's going to blow up all 3 of my opponent's lands, is definitely going to win me the game at this point. There's pretty much nothing they can do to come back from it at that point, especially because I've got the Manifold Key there and I can start making the Sundering Titan unblockable. So even if they do manage to draw a land and play a blocker or something, that's not going to help in any way. So here we go, just casually tutoring up and playing a Sundering Titan on turn 3. And yeah, there we go. My opponent concedes, there's nothing they can do about that. So onto sideboarding. So my opponent has got some pretty powerful cards they can bring in. They've got a Collector Roof, they've got a Force of Vigor. Those are definitely cards that are coming in. And a Cindervines. So I've just sort of got to have a look at what do I have that I can bring in. So All Is Dust is going to be great. They don't have a Null Rod, they've got a Collector Roof, so that means that every hate piece they could be playing is going to be coloured, so All Is Dust is great. Bringing in Repeal, just because I want a way of getting a Collector Roof off the board. It only does it for a turn, but it means that I can dump a bunch of mana rocks on the board, end of turn, repeal the Youth, and then cast a Sundering Titan or something on the following turn. Bringing in Padeem, because they're going to have a whole load of removal type spells, and if I can force them to spend a removal spell on Padeem before they can remove any of my actual threats, then that's good. And bringing in Hydroblast, they've just got a bunch of just random red stuff that Hydroblast is sort of reasonable at getting off the board. Stuff like Clothis can be awkward to fight through. Stops Ren and 6 strip mining me to death. Stops Kolaghan's Command. Stops Cindervines. So there's a few things that I want to hit with Hydroblast, and now it's just a matter of what do I take out. So I don't love Memory Jar, being able to draw them into some of their instant speed artifact removal. Blightsteel I'm not a huge fan of. They've got a couple of edicts, and then it's just shaving a couple of other cards so that I've got space to bring in the other things. So I'm on the draw again. So looking at this hand's does have some plays. It's a little bit slow. It's basically turn 1 Manifold Key, turn 2 Talisman, and Talisman then casting Emery. It doesn't have any way of getting up to casting the Ugin, and I don't love being all in on Emery because my opponent has got a lot of removal and can pretty easily get rid of the Emery, which means this hand is going to be pretty weak. And even if I draw a threat, it's not going to be getting that threat out fast, so I'm going to mulligan this one. Unfortunately, this hand is substantially worse. Expensive cards, blue cards, no way of casting either of those things. So this is another mulligan. Thankfully my opponent has also mulliganed, so that helps a bit. And now we've got a hand where Again, I've got Transmute and I can't cast it, but that's fine. We can just bottom that. It's also got Urza's Saga, which is going to be fantastic here because that means that I've got a threat in this hand, even though it's just lands and some mana. So I put back Blighted Cataract because I'm never going to get to the 6 mana in this game. Like, I'm not going to get there in a hurry to be able to activate it, so I might as well keep just the more powerful, some of the more powerful threats. So here I'm just hoping my opponent doesn't Thoughtseize me. So I played a Death Ride out, so that's very good for me. Thoughtseize taking my Mana Crypt would be very awkward for me because it means that I'm going to find it very hard to actually activate the Chapter 2 ability of Urza's Saga. So here I just lead on Urza's Saga and play out Expedition Map. I think a bit about whether I'm playing out Mana Crypt, and I figured that I'm better off holding the Mana Crypt in my hand. My opponent does have Thoughtseize and Inquisition and things to get it out of my hand, but I figured if they didn't cast them on turn 1, they're unlikely to have it, and they're far more likely to have a removal spell that can get rid of it, and I really want to be able to have it out with the Chapter 2 ability of Urza's Saga active. So now I'm just sort of hoping that my opponent doesn't play anything too obnoxious. I'm sort of really hoping that I've got a couple of turns before Collector Roof comes down. So here they play Ashiok. Ashiok is quite awkward for me because it stops the Expedition map. So that stops me from being able to sort of tutor up any threats. So I'm just relying on whatever I draw plus what I can get off the Saga. So here, basically just sort of choosing what land I want to play. So I've got a choice of Waterlogged Grove and Tolarian Academy that lets me leave the Hydroblast up. I decide to go for playing the Academy. I just sort of want to have mana available in case I draw something, draw a threat, rather than playing out the Waterlogged Grove. Because I'm going to have some threats coming off this Urza Saga, so I don't super need the access to the card draw, and I'd rather just sort of be able to build up my mana generation for in case I can't draw some of my big threats. So here they're just playing out some creatures, which I'm completely fine with. I'm going to be making some creatures that are a lot bigger than theirs, so them just spending their mana on throwing out creatures is fine for me. Sylvan Library is a little bit awkward. It's going to draw them a bunch of cards. It's another thing I can't Hydroblast, so we just sort of have to hope that they don't draw at all. So here we go, end of turn, make a construct. Untap. And draw another land, which is a little bit awkward. But here we'll make another construct before Urza Saga disappears. Unfortunately, I don't get the Chapter 3 ability thanks to Ashiok. But I think the fact that I've got a pair of 4/4s in play means that I am in a pretty reasonable position. So here I figured that I probably need to try and see if I can get a bit more action happening just because the Sylvan Library's there, and that's going to be fairly awkward for me. So I decided to take myself off Hydroblast for this next turn in order to play the Waterlogged Grove and draw a card, and just see if I can get some more artifacts and start getting these constructs pumped up a little bit more. So here I'm going after Ashiok, just because I'd like to be able to get Ashiok off the board and be able to get my Expedition map active. My opponent's been pretty aggressive there in protecting their Ashiok, so if I can keep trading off of their creatures, then that puts me in a good spot. I'm happy if my Urza Saga just ends up trading for a few of their creatures. That's still going to put me in a good position, because pretty much any one of the threats that I draw is capable of winning me the game. So if I can run them out of resources, That is definitely good for me. And here we have Inquisition that takes my Hydroblast, which has not had any targets for the entire game anyway, so not too big a loss, to be honest. So here we are, just drawing more mana, which is, of course exactly what I need. But at least it means that I'm going to be able to cast basically any card I draw from this point on. So now attacking both constructs into Ashiok. Um, at this point I'd like to see if I can get Ashiok off the board and get access to the Expedition map, just because I've got so much mana that being able to map for Inventor's Fair is going to be really good. My opponent jumps with both of their creatures to protect the Ashiok, which, I mean, I'm not too happy with. Urza Saga at this point is now traded for 3 of my opponent's cards. So here I just play the Workshop out, play the Monolith out, just to give myself plenty of mana for next turn. I didn't want to play the Deserted Temple out, just because that is going to make less mana if my opponent gets rid of the Academy, and they do have both Strip Mine and Wasteland, so the Academy sticking around is definitely not guaranteed. So here I play Ramming Up Excavator. I was definitely a little bit worried about them hitting Pernicious Deed or something, which could wipe out the constructs, although I don't know that they have actually brought a deed in. So here we draw Ugin the Ineffable, which I've got more than enough mana to cast. So here's where I should, if I had been paying attention to their life total, should just minus on the Ramming Up Excavator, swing in for lethal. But this is what happens when you focus in too much on getting the Planeswalker off the board. Took the opportunity to get rid of Ashiok, which gave my opponent an additional turn, which was definitely a slightly suboptimal play there. But thankfully, despite my opponent getting a look at an additional couple of cards with Sylvan Library, thankfully they don't manage to find anything and still get there. But yeah, definitely a note on the dangers of focusing too much on removing Planeswalkers and failing to look at your opponent's life total. Also a nice demonstration of just how strong Urza Saga can be. That card was ridiculously good in this game, to be honest. So definitely going to be playing some more of that card.